was quietly protective of my heart to reassure that I couldn't break to pieces and be left alone once more. If you hadn't been so patient.
Here in the Czech Republic, the weather is definitely turning into winter with temperatures getting close to 0 degrees Celsius, sometimes even below zero on some of those chilly mornings. So it is time to start baking a lot and making all these rich, thick stews. And of course, bread is very much a cozy meal for this cozy season as well. This is only the end or almost the end of the process where I've already had the bread in my proofing basket overnight and I'm only going to score it, which these days I just do the very simple cross. I don't really am in the mood for any fancy scoring patterns, so I do just that one. And if you want to see the full recipe for my sourdough bread, then I will link it down below.
I have made a lot of mistakes. I have been too self-involved, been protective of my feelings, but somehow you made me fall. You got underneath the surface and you shattered every wall. And I know I got that feeling, there's no question anymore. And now I stand here calling at you.
This one is going to be a first for me. I am making a goulash out of this deer meat, specifically fallow deer, or at least that's how Google translated it for me. I'm not sure how common this type of meat is in other countries, but here in the Czech Republic, it's relatively common to get. And you need to clean this meat because a lot of times, at least from what I understand, it has this tough membrane on it. I believe it's called the silver skin. It literally looks like silver skin and it's just this membrane that's on the meat and is very tough. So if you cook it with the meat, you will then have these very tough parts of the meat that will be really difficult to chew. So you want to remove it, and since I'm not super practiced in doing that, it definitely took me quite some time to get it done. Once I had all the meat in these chunks, I browned it in some lard and then took it out of that pot again and just set it aside. To that same pot, I then added some chopped onions and, you guessed it, bacon, and browned those. I added a little bit of flour and then also some paprika. After a little bit, once you can really smell the paprika becomes very aromatic. I added some red wine and then I've put the meat back into the pot. Then I added garlic cloves and also a little bit of thyme and a little bit of marjoram, which is very similar to oregano if you don't have that particular spice where you live. After a little bit, I added some tomato puree and also some broth. And I guess technically, like with all broths, it's best to add the type of broth that corresponds to the meat that you're cooking with. So in this case, it should be some sort of a game broth, even though I don't even know if you make that. But obviously, you could, but it's not something I have on hand. So I added my chicken broth. I then also added some bay leaves and allspice. After that, set the lid on the pot and cook until tender. And so I believe in this case that took maybe an hour. And then once that was done, I also added some cranberry jam. And so you again get this very rich, a little bit sweet, with the cranberry jam, with the red wine, that sort of a flavor profile. And I think that just fits this weather and this season perfectly. I am sure that you will all be very familiar with this next meal. It's these like mini pizza pastry rolls. I don't know what to call them. I don't have an official title for them, but you take some pastry dough, you put some ketchup on it, some ham and cheese, a little bit of oregano I do as well. You roll them up, cut them into slices, and then you can put some egg wash as well, bake them. That's it. It's pretty much one of the easiest recipes, easiest meals I know how to do, and it just requires so little effort. Like there is no chopping other than chopping the slices of dough, but no chopping vegetables, no chopping meat, nothing like that. It's just put a few ingredients together, put it in the oven, and that's it. And I also feel like it's such a crowd pleaser. Everyone usually loves these. I love them, my partner loves them. Although I have to say, our baby, 1.5-year-old, she was not as much into them as I thought she would be. Maybe it was the ketchup, which she's just not very used to, and it did have a relatively strong taste in these, so maybe it was that, not sure. But again, for me, a very easy and cozy meal. And of course, I have to do some like proper baking as well. And so I'm making this cinnamon wreath, you could call it, with just a little bit of sourdough. So it's from this yeast dough, which I think is just my favorite kind of dough. It's one that I can't really make properly without a stand mixer, which you will see in just a moment. And I've done plenty of recipes from that dough here on the channel, so you've seen me and heard me talk about that before. But it's the one that I just love to eat so much. So you mix up all of the ingredients for the dough, and I am listing all of them in the description of the video. I am first mixing them with my hand and then going in with the wooden spoon. And this is the part where I'm just not trained enough to have enough strength and practice in making a very nice and smooth and glossy dough out of this. Like it would just require so much more kneading time than what I'm able to do. But again, like I said so many times before, it doesn't really change the end result all that much, or at least like the end result is still super delicious to me. So as much as I would love to have a stand mixer one day, I am more than fine to go without it for now. Once it's relatively well mixed, I set it on the counter with a tea towel over it until I can see that it has risen quite a bit. Usually they will say something like double its amount or something, but I can never guess like how much, what's the percentage of the rising. It's just like, does it look like it has risen quite a bit? And also, how does it feel to the touch? Does it feel a lot more puffed up and airy and less sticky than before? That's kind of how I go about it. And I think time-wise, this was maybe like an hour, hour and a half of rising time. I then take the dough and roll it out into a rectangle. pour some melted butter over it and then sprinkle with quite a bit of sugar mixed with cinnamon. And I actually did a mix of brown sugar and regular sugar just because I didn't have enough of the regular sugar, but I don't think it really matters what type of sugar you're using. Once it's all covered, I am rolling it up and then moving it onto my baking tray and making the wreath out of it. So essentially a circle. And I have to admit, it has never really worked out like super symmetrical. There is always this bit that has a little bit of less of the dough where the two ends are meeting, and then the other part that's more full. So this time I really tried my best to kind of shape the dough on the tray so that it's more equal and more just symmetrically thick all around. And then comes what I feel like is the fun part of this. I'm taking a knife and I'm cutting through maybe like 2/3 into the width of the dough. So cutting that in, and then once I have it all, the full circle cut into little slices like this, I am then flipping them. So one flap, or whatever you want to call it, one slice goes into the middle of the circle, and then the other one you just kind of flip on its side and it stays on the outside. You do have to you want to try to make the circle big enough so that you have enough space in the middle to flip all of those slices into that middle part. And you will still have to kind of squeeze it in. I'm then spreading some egg wash on it, mostly on the sides. I don't want to get it all messed up with all the sugar that you're seeing on the individual layers. And then it goes into the oven on 180 degrees for about 30 minutes, but this really depends on how crunchy you want the outcome to be. If you want it more crunchy, obviously do it for a little bit longer, or increase the temperature at the very end to a little bit higher so that it gets even more golden. But I do like it more on the lighter side, and even this was maybe a little bit too, I would still prefer it to be a little bit lighter, a little bit softer. So I think next time I'll try to do maybe an even lower temperature. And like I said, I love this so much. So even though I've made this primarily for our breakfast, I don't think it has ever lasted untouched until the morning for the breakfast. I always eat a couple slices in the evening. I just have to dig into it. I hope you've enjoyed watching me cook all of these cozy meals, and I'll see you next week. Bye.